Shell or the BP, or the organizations which are basically converting themselves from a petroleum field to the energy field. Take an example from last decades, Shell is trying themselves from a oil and gas industry to the particularly they are looking after for a converting for an energy sector industry. We will be looking after, there is a huge shift and the opportunities in the renewable energy sector in millions if we will be looking after from that is basically from 7.3 millions is which is in 2012, and now it is basically approx 13 millions, which is basically not a small number, and by 2030 this scenario will be changed.
Good evening everyone. So thanks Mr. Mittal, first of all for a brief introduction, and thank you everyone. The most important part is basically nowadays the students of, from class 9th, class 10th, and even the class from 12th, they are basically looking after the careers, and they are concerned because not only from on its own as well as the careers which will be beneficial for not only for them, it is beneficial for overall society as well as for the overall world, and what will be the scenario for the futuristic works. So today I'm taking you some things which is basically related, not only related to the jobs, it is basically related to the jobs as well as the entrepreneurships. So first of all, before moving to that particular green career, I just looking after that, that many of you are basically concerned that this is basically only for the science graduates, or maybe for the commerce graduates, or maybe for the accounts, or maybe for the commerce graduates or arts graduates. But please understand, this career is for all. Even the guy who is basically after 10th choose for the arts, this career is for them. The guy who is basically looking after for commerce, this career is for them, as well as the obviously the guys who are basically from science stream, this career is also for them. So it is for all particularly. Yes, you are basically concerned that for which particular field you will be looking after. So first of all, before starting to the moving to the green career, please understand the green career is basically related to your green energy sector. Okay, and in green energy sector, if we will be looking after, the career will be nowadays not only in the field which is basically related to the petroleum or related to the oil and gas. This is basically related to the renewables. So nowadays, as you know very well, that the industry is moving from non-renewable sectors to the renewable sector. So the opportunities are basically looking after over there. So if you will be looking after the opportunities that such as the sector which is basically from a renewable to non-renewable, from a non-renewable to renewables, that our dependency, still our dependency in the energy sector particularly, or for the energy, is basically on, for first thing is basically the coal. Second is basically we will be looking after the oil and gas, and the another sector which we will be looking after is still 80 to 90% ratio is basically non-renewable, but overall in world. But nowadays the scenario is basically moving and then shifting from that particular field. And as per the government of India and the other countries are also the part of Paris 2020 agreement. So maximum organizations or maximum governments are basically focusing that to convert themselves for a renewable sector. And for that particular thing, there is basically a slight shift from the last decade. And that shift is basically, still we will be looking after that there is a huge shift requirements, but still there is a shift from 10% to 25%, and our energy sector, which is basically earlier dependent to 80 to 90% for the non-renewables, now it is basically up to 60 to 70%, and then 25 to 30% is basically the shift towards the renewables. And these renewables are what? These renewables are like solar. These renewables are like wind energy. These renewables are basically, we will be looking after biodegradables. These renewables are basically not only this is one more field which is basically we are recycled, or we are basically looking after the waste, which is basically a source of energy. So the waste management is also the part. So if we will be looking after the field which is basically concerned, or the field which is basically we will be looking after for a green career, it's basically in logistic, it's basically in oil and gas, it's basically in the particularly the chemistry, or it is basically related to the accounts for that. So this field is going on. Can you please change the move on the screens? Yeah. So first is basically the renewable energy. Second is basically we will be looking after the sustainable. Third is basically the green constructions. And the fourth one is the environmental consultancies. So if we will be looking after for the careers particularly, it is not only for the jobs, it is basically jobs as well as for the entrepreneurship for a longer period of time. So as I discussed that the renewables are this, whereas the sustainable are basically, take an example nowadays, the bios, early days you understand the biogas, but nowadays the commercialization of the biogas towards the bio CNG, which is basically the utilization as a big source for the automobile industry. Similarly, the you understand the NCR guys are basically facing the problem from a this particular the pollution through the burning of the waste of the agriculture. Nowadays, the scenario will be changes very soon in that particular field, that these all the wastages are converted for the sources of the raw material for that particular biogas, and the bio CNG plants are basically developed on that particular wastages of the product. Similarly, the products which are basically made from the petrochemicals, like take an example of lubricants, take an example of the refined oil. All these products are basically reproduced, and these are basically converting, maybe take an example of biodiesel, take an example, these products are again utilization for the reproduction of the same lubricants, or maybe for the paint industry, or maybe for the rubber industry. So the recycling process is also going on to save the environmental things. And for that particular thing, if I discussed about the carriers, so if a guy who is basically choose arts and is good in literature particularly, so that guy is working very well for the report writings in the organization like Deloitte. In the organization, maybe you will be looking after for the ENY. So these organizations are providing the reports to the organizations who are basically converting the core organization or the domain organization like Shell or the BP, or the organizations which are basically converting themselves from a petroleum field to the energy field. Take an example, from last decades, Shell is trying themselves from a oil and gas industry to the particularly they are looking after for a converting for an energy sector industry. So they invest huge on that particular field, which is basically converting themselves from that particular field. So that's why these types of organization who is providing the consultancies to them. So for a graduate who has a good in English or good in literature particularly, they can also looking after for that particular thing. The second thing which we will be looking after, that is basically the graduates who are from commerce, or who are basically looking after for the accountancy. So all these organizations which are basically looking after for the renewables, or maybe the non-renewables, or maybe the recycling format, all these organizations are looking after for the establishment, or maybe for the feasibility on a financial basis. Because if a conversion from a one field to another field, it is required only because the thing financial feasibility is required for that. Means how much amount will be invested over there, how much you will receive after some time, or what will be the ROI, return on investment, for that the organizations are looking after. So for the commerce graduate, these particular things are most important, that for these types of accountancies is required over there. These types of financial capabilities, they are required over there. And then the science graduate. The science graduates, yes, they are the field in the engineering, as well as they are the fields in the science streams also. That BSc chemistry, BSc physics, as well as the similarly the engineering, which is basically looking after for the chemical engineering, oil and gas engineering, petroleum engineering, renewable engineering, or maybe the field which is basically nowadays we will be looking after the sector which is basically established, that is CGD, city gas distribution industry, which is also again a field for that particular scenario. Please change the slide, sir. This next one, sir. So over here, you will be looking after the developing your green career or the green jobs particular. The first field is we will be looking after renewables, that is solar, wind, hydro, and electric vehicles. And the second one is basically the energy efficiency, energy auditing, and the green constructions. Environmental consultancies, which is basically provided from the carbon management, offsetting, and sustainable consultancies. Then the waste management or the waste to energy, particularly the environmental educations and the advocacy, basically for the laws graduate, if you are looking after opportunity for in law particularly. So this type of environmental laws nowadays are very strong worldwide, and for that particular field, the opportunities are very vast. So that's why if the law graduates are also looking after for the that particular courses, this type of program is also provided by the organization or by the universities particularly, and they are looking after for that. And then the green technology in the R&D as well as for the data analytics for the sustainability. And the last, not the least, that is basically the agriculture and sustainable food system for particularly and the water management system. So all these fields are basically looking after for a green jobs. And please understand all your skills which you develop as a science graduate, or maybe as a commerce graduate, or maybe as an arts graduate, all these things will be available over here, and you can basically absorb over here for that particular career which is related to all this green field. And the most important part, it is not only for the job, it is for the entrepreneurships also. If you want to establish your own solar power plant, that can also be possible in that particular field. And similarly, if you want to establish your own particular hydropower plants, nowadays with the finances are also provided, maybe on a smaller scale, that is also provided by the organizations as well as the government is also looking after. And the most important part is basically the waste management process, where the biodegradables can be changed for the bio-CNG or maybe in the form of the biogases. So all these things are basically financed by the organizations, and this will be the opportunities as a entrepreneurs also. So that's why I just mentioned that those things, that the most important part is basically you will be not looking after only on the jobs, you will be also looking after for the entrepreneurships careers also. Please change the slide. Yeah. So what type of skills you will be looking after, or maybe what type of skills are developed over there? If we discuss that in the scenario of 2022 to 23, almost 12.3%, or maybe you can mention the 4% growth on a year-to-year basis is basically looking after in this particular field. And if we will be looking after by 2030, so we can expect that 29% on year-and-year basis, the growth opportunities will be there for that. So the most important part is basically, if we will be looking after that, the overall scenario, 21% from 2016 to 2023, it's already growth is there in this particular sector in Indian perspective itself. Next, please. Next, please. And the last, not the least, that changed is basically up to 81% of transition for this particular green jobs. And the sustainability is the core, particularly we will be looking after, because it is not, we can discuss that is basically the relatively the new and quickly growing roles like sustainability managers, or maybe the energy auditors, or maybe you will be looking after for the HSC auditors, or maybe even the insurance auditors also. So insurance are basically the field which is basically the organizations are looking after, that this is for or not only the health insurance, not only the organization, this is particularly looking after that. Take an example of recently taken example of the bunkering industry, or maybe be the charting industry. For these particular different scenarios of the industries, the insurance are the huge amount. So for that particular thing, the energy insurance sector is also developing. And for that particular thing, the commerce guys are also required to establish that financial stability over there. So that's why that's the most important part we will be looking after, that the insurance sector is also growing up. As a energy auditors, you will be looking after for that. Next, please. So this is the growth prospects, or maybe you can looking after that. The most important part is basically the infrastructure, the development in there in the green sector. Second is basically the nature. Third is we will be looking after the tangible and the intangible scenarios. So over here, if we build the carriers in the environment, the IT is required. Then the civil if we will be looking after that, the civil constructions is developed over there. Similarly, as well as the transportation is also there. Whereas if we will be looking after for the manufacturing recycle sector, then the waste management to the extract the raw materials, distribution, or the manufacturing processes. This is basically a circular process which is going on, and it will not be on end for the further years on years basis. So it is not only that we will be looking after for that particular thing. So it is basically the engineering planning process, and on year basis, the different sources for the green energy will be established and developed over there. So you require to making a shape for that particular economy, to convert your economy from a gray economy to the green economy, as well as the education and inspiring motivation persuasion is also working over there, and the services and the experiences are also related to that. Then the most important part, if we will be looking after nowadays, that is basically the natural resource management, because in near future, as we discussed, the oil will be finished, or maybe the scenario which we will be looking after, that after 50 years, that there is a very the crude oil, or maybe the related to the petroleum products, there are the scenario. But the thing is, if we can manage those particular things, it will be much better. For a longer period of time, we can utilize those natural resources. And similarly, the environmental scientists are also required for the environment science. And similarly, the energy and the smart grid systems are also looking after for the power sector, to utilizing the sources in a proper manner, particularly. Next, please. So the number of green energy jobs, as you looking after from 2020 to 2023, it's this is basically the international scenario. We will be looking after. There is a huge shift, and the opportunities in the renewable energy sector in millions, if we will be looking after from, that is basically from 7.3 million, which is in 2012, and now it is basically approx 13 millions, which is basically not a small number. And by 2030, this scenario will be changed, and this scenario will be hit up to 25 to maybe approx 30 million, as the organizations are basically looking after that particular carrier. And if we will be looking after this particular field, will hit very soon in that particular field, that 50 million jobs this particular field will be provided. Next, please. Similarly, for the green, or maybe if you can mention that the clean energy, against the fossil fuel, the clean energy which we'll be looking after. So the investment by 2000, if we will take that 2015 to 2023, the investment is again in a green or maybe clean energy is basically in billions, is more than 600 billions is invested in US dollars, if we will be looking after, whereas the investment in the old fossil fuel systems are basically reducing. So that's why the technology is developed for that particular field. Their feasibility, or their particularly the financial field is also growing over there. So if we will be looking after, it is not only the jobs or the opportunities, it is basically the investment is also coming in that particular field. Take an example, nowadays in India itself, the huge target for the solar development, and for that particular thing, almost by 2030, 25% of the energy which is basically received from this particular green sources, and which includes the solar maximum and the wind also. Next, please. So the future prospects, if we will be looking after, as I mentioned, that there will be a 24 plus million jobs, as well as the opportunities will be there, and bare minimum to minimum average packages which will be started from for a graduate, which is basically approx 6 to 8 lakhs annually, and for a postgraduate will be started on the basis of a 10 lakh organizations in Indian scenario. And if you will be looking after yourself on an international scenario, that will be approx $50,000 annual basis, similarly from a 40,000 euros or to 1 lakh euros in the European sector. So that type of opportunities will be created in that particular fields. Next, please. So if we discussed about the UPS, so these are the different types of programs, and these are the different types of careers will be there. Some are basically related to the commerce, some are basically related to the law, some are basically related to the engineering side, as well as some are postgraduate programs are there, both in particularly the management field as well as in that particular technological field. So this type of courses are provided not only by the UPS, but the other universities are also looking after. Yes, we are basically in that particular field. So that's why we have the specialization in that. Thank you.